Good day, guys. Travis here. So today's video is going to be a 3.5-year update on my Rheem Proterra Performance Platinum 50-gallon heat pump water heater. For those of you unaware of what a heat pump water heater is, it is essentially just a water tank with either a mounted on top heat pump for air exchange, or there are a handful of models out there that you'll have the actual heat pump portion outside, and sort of like a mini split, you'll then have lines that run in to do the heating of the tank itself from the exterior. So what's the big draw here? Well, again, the same draw as with heat pumps. It's all about reductions in energy usage. In these instances, these usually are pretty good, but there are some caveats with them. Later on in the video, I'll go through, the pros and the cons in a little more detail. But just know that when I originally installed this, there were only a handful of these available on the consumer market. So if you ran down to Lowe's, if you ran out to Home Depot, primarily the two that you were going to choose from at the time that I installed this was either this Rheem Proterra model that I installed, or A.O. Smith actually had a competing model that came in the same size arrays. So at the time, of course, I researched pretty heavily as to which one I would rather have before I purchased this one. I bought the Rheem because it was still slightly more energy efficient than the A.O. Smith. But the bigger thing for me was this is going in the downstairs living area with 2 bedrooms separated from it by essentially a hall and a doorway. So I was a little more concerned about sound, and of the two, this one was supposedly much quieter than the A.O. Smith model was. I did do some additional sound mitigation after I got this put in because it was still a little boomy for my tastes. I'll show a video kind of what I ended up doing to make this a good bit more reasonable. Keep in mind that this was installed in May of 22, and as these models have gotten better, supposedly they are addressing some of the sound concerns that originally came from these. This is the unit as it is installed in my house, so there are some key differences from an installation standpoint that you'll notice with this one. So the first biggest difference is you got to have a form of condensate management. So I was really lucky in that I actually have a sink drain that runs right here and then runs around the back of the cabinet, and that hits a sink. I literally just cut that, spliced it, and plumbed that directly into it with a little trap there. So that's one thing that you do have to have that is different than just a regular electric water heater. So another thing you'll notice is there's kind of a split right here. So everything from here down is storage tank, and everything from that point up is all heat pump. So what this does is it actually takes air in through the inlet, goes through this filter, and then it pumps the cool conditioned air out of this outlet. So this is where you would duct it out if you were going to have to supply a duct, or if you just specifically wanted to redirect that air somewhere. So it is a smart unit, so you can do a lot of stuff with this. It does have app integration, which it gives the plug for right there on the side. The app is serviceable. I can't benefit from a lot of the things that the app itself can actually do. It's fine. I'll go into a little more detail on the app a little bit later in the video. So you can see there, I did install this May 3rd of 22. So notes for installation. Most of your hot water heaters are going to have line sets that are coming down from the ceiling. So my old one had inlet, outlet, or it was actually reversed there. And this worked fine for that unit because I didn't have to reroute anything with this one. As you can see, I had to get a little creative because this is the cold water supply. Ignore the fact that the guys that originally did this put the hot on-off valve on this side. This is cold water, and it actually goes all the way down and supplies the cold water into the bottom of the tank. Now, this makes a ton of sense to me because that allows the water level to be cold. Cold water is going to sit on the bottom, and as you use up your cold water, your hot water outlet is right here. So it is very nearly at the top of the tank. And then, so there's more or less, there's just less mixing of the water. For those of you concerned that this is touching this rock wool, you can hold a blowtorch literally against rock wool insulation and it has no problem. So my balmy 125-degree water temperature is not going to be a problem at all. You can't really see, but it is not touching this 2x4 stud anywhere. I did say I would talk a little bit more about some sound deadening. So this is a good example. You can see originally when I put this unit in, this closet did not have any insulation. I did run out and buy some rock wool insulation to put in here. And as you can see, I ran that almost all the way up to the ceiling. I didn't go all the way up because I have web truss between floors. And because I do keep this door shut almost all of the time, I wanted to make sure that that was left open so that I can actually pull warm air in through the top of the unit where it'll then be drawn down through, and then the cold air will more or less drop because cold air drops, and then that would allow this to sort of naturally draft out from under this. That works for almost all of the year. I do have this set up in hybrid mode for the time, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the modes you can have, but essentially what this means is if it gets too cold in this closet and I have a high demand for water, it'll actually still turn on the 4500 watt elements. So this is the top element, this is the bottom element. As far as I can tell, the only difference between the newer model and this is that if it has the elements in it, these are a black, like, composite plastic piece. So that's really about the only difference I've seen. If you guys want a little bit of a shot of that, I have a still photo of this that I'll throw up here in a little bit. Same thing for the energy guide. Very pleased with the unit overall. Do keep in mind that you have to keep this clear and that you have to have at least 6 inches to get this filter in and out. I clean this, oh gosh, probably only twice a year do I pull that out and clean it, and even then it's usually, there's really nothing on it. So pretty low maintenance. It does have the ability to drain it down here, so this is your dedicated drain valve should you decide to use it. These two come with automatic leak detection in some units, and down here it'll just essentially have an extra box that physically turns off the incoming cold water if it does sense a leak, which is nice. I didn't really have it because at the time that model wasn't available in the store. Additional notes on installation. So this is the actual installation guide that came with the unit. So it does designate a specific room cubic footage that it needs to make sure that the unit has enough air exchange so that the unit can pull heat from the air in that room and actually drop it into the tank. So if you're doing no ducting, no nothing, and you're putting it in a sealed room, you need at least a 10 by 10 room that is 7 feet tall. If you are putting it in a room that is not that large, but it is connected to a larger room, that would be the picture on the right here, and that would be a full louvered door, both top and bottom. If you are putting it in a room that is too small, but it is again adjoining a larger room, you can have louvers at the top and a specific size gap at the bottom. So for those of you who are curious, this is basically the setup that mine has, and that is due to its ability to pull the air from the web trusses that are between my first and second floor. It acts in capacity just like this. And the last two options are you can have a gap at the bottom of the door and duct the cool conditioned air elsewhere, but you do at least have to have the ability for that to pull the air into the room before you can duct it out. Or, of course, you could do a full ducted in and out situation. As an aside on ducting these units, personally, I would not be a fan of ducting the cool air to the outside for a couple reasons. One, you are losing the potential savings in terms of air conditioning and dehumidification during the cooling seasons. Two, during the heating seasons, if you're actually ducting that air outside, for every cubic meter of air that you send outside during the winter, you have to bring it back in through your envelope somewhere in the house. Now, if it's 70 degrees outside, that may not be a problem. If, however, it's 5 degrees outside, 10 degrees outside, then you're actually pulling colder air in than you would be to just condition the 40-degree air that's coming out of the outlet. Another aside on if you are ducting both the intake and the output to the outside. I can't find anywhere, guys, where these units say that they are capable of producing heat in cold climates. So if you were, again, let's take the it's 10 degrees outside example. If you're pulling 10-degree air from outside, running it through this heat pump and pumping, in theory, colder than 10-degree air back outside, how inefficient is that for a unit that is not designed to handle potentially very cold climates? So I have seen some complaints online from people who have installed these, typically in areas that are not conditioned, and they live in cold climates, and their complaint is that in the heat pump mode, these things can't keep up. And I would be very hesitant to assume that I could run this thing if it is much colder than about 60 degrees outside. Could it work in 50 degrees? It possibly could. It's probably 50 degrees in my closet sometimes, but that may not reflect the air that's actually pulling down from the ceiling. That would reflect the air that's dropping down to the floor and coming out at floor level. But in my opinion, it is much easier to heat 40-degree room air up to 70 than it is to risk ducting this unit to the outside and potentially having to deal with a lot of air infiltration that you may not want to have to deal with in terms of like just causing other humidity issues. In the summertime, you're going to be pulling that hot, humid air inside, and then you're fighting humidity even more than you potentially were before. So I know some guys will recommend doing this. Personally, I would stay away from this unless I can see a graph somewhere where the company is confident saying, if it's 10 degrees outside, worry not, this unit will handle that. I wouldn't risk that, guys. Incidentally, because my old water heater was larger in diameter than this new one, you can actually see that to get that one out, I had to take the doors off the hinges and cut out the door stop on both the left and right just to get that old unit out. So I actually have even a little bit more ability for air to come and go from this room. And this works basically anytime that it's greater than 10 degrees outside. I don't really seem to have that much slower recuperation time. So I don't really have that many issues. If I ever do have an issue with it, even when it's that cold, I could either leave it in hybrid mode and it'll just use the resistance elements that are in there, or I can always crack the door just a pinch. And that does make it a little noisier down here, but not substantially so. All right, guys, if that wasn't a good intro into how loud this thing is, I don't know what would be. So this 60.6 decibels was door open directly in front of the unit itself, right where the temperature gauge is displayed. If you see that 76.1 at the right-hand side of the screen, that was the max. That was if I took the phone and actually held it right directly in front of the exit grate with the unit running. I don't, however, know how much of that was just wind noise. This 53.7 was with the door closed and the phone held directly in front of the closed door. 51.3 was with the door open to the closet and standing in the doorway to the bathroom. 46.7 was with the closet door closed, but again, standing in the entryway door to the bathroom. So this app actually recommends what it thinks this level is close to, and this was described as a quiet whisper. And finally, a 30.3 is where I would actually lay my head on the pillow in either of the two downstairs bedrooms. This was interestingly enough described as rustling leaves levels of sound. Overall, I'm actually really happy with the sound control in this room. Now, I wasn't super thrilled with it initially before I did the Rockwell, so that may have to be a consideration that you guys are taking into account whenever you're looking at where you're going to put this thing. But overall, in terms of sound, it is a very low, barely audible hum in either one of the bedrooms now, and that was my primary concern. I don't necessarily care if it's a little boomy when you're in the shower. It's not nearly as loud as the sound of water in the shower, nor the sound of water falling into a filling tub, if you want kind of an estimation of its sound. It's far and away quieter than either of those two with that door shut. This brings us to the next talking point. This is a heat pump, so you are actually pulling heat out of the room or out of the surrounding air and dumping that heat into the water tank. So the drawback to that is you are expelling cool air in place of that hot air. So this is kind of nice in the predominantly cooling seasons when your mini splits or your air conditioner or whatever would be running to cool down the house. However, it's a little bit of a problem sometimes, or at least a concern that people should have in predominantly heating seasons. So if you want to know the actual temperature of how the air coming out of this unit, check out this next video. All right, for those of you questioning how cold the air coming out of this unit actually gets, this is with it running full whack, and it has been running for at least 30 minutes at this point. So when I originally opened this door, I actually saw outlet temperatures as low as 40 degrees. So has this been a problem? I do live in the mountainous area of West Virginia, and I am a predominantly heating-dominated area. I do find that I've had no problems. Now, that doesn't mean that not everyone will, because I typically leave that door shut on the actual closet that it's in, but I almost always leave the bathroom door itself open, and I blow heat across the bedroom that's down there with that mini split head, and it blows directly into that room. So for those of you concerned that this is going to cause too much of a heating load in the wintertime, I've actually had no problems. It does get cooler, obviously, in that bathroom if that door is shut, but if you're only shutting it for the length of a shower, it's not a problem. Another benefit is that since this is a heat pump, this does actually pull condensate out of the air and can reduce room air humidity. For those of you who watched my second heat pump video, the problems that I was having downstairs were also aided in the fact that I did put this unit downstairs. It does have some dehumidification potential. I don't actually know what that is because I do have it just running directly into a ducted line that goes straight into my sewer. So I can't say how much it pulls, but at the very least, it certainly doesn't hurt. So the last thing from a cold air standpoint, guys, don't forget that if you are in primarily a heating dominated area and you just don't think that you're going to have, enough warm air in the house, this is just a regular hot water heater as well. So you can literally just turn off the heat pump portion and let the heating elements run it like it were any other 50-gallon water tank. So you're not stuck in just, oh, I have to run the heat pump with this particular unit. Now be careful, because there are units out there that do not have this same heating elements now that they've been out for a while. I'll talk about those a little bit later in some of the summary sections, just to make sure that you're getting the correct unit when you're looking at this. And you're saying, well, yes, but that's gonna negate some of my savings. Well, it is, but when I get to the dollars and cents of this one, guys, you're gonna see that even if you only ran this in heat pump mode for 8 months out of the year, you are still going to see substantial savings. Since we've already talked about some of the drawbacks or potential cons of the unit, let's go ahead and cover maybe what the largest hurdle is, and that is the initial cost to purchase this unit. So I purchased this obviously in May of 22. The units are roughly $100 more than this now on average to purchase. So you're looking at around $1,800 to $1,900 by the time you get the unit in your driveway. How much more expensive is that than a comparable unit? Well, Rheem will actually sell you this exact unit, but without the heat pump on it. And that's about $750 from Home Depot today. However, if you want the non-smart enabled contractor grade, that's only about $529. So the cost differential here to get a unit in there that's functioning, and you essentially won't be able to tell the difference for all intents and purposes, is anywhere from $1,000 to $1,200. A word of warning here, guys. So you'll notice that these are 3 different heat pumps, all of them Rheem branded, and all of them under the Proterra name. So obviously they don't all look the same. The ones that have what appears to just be a GFCI 15 amp receptacle plug on them is exactly what they are. And I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with these units, but what I am saying is those are not the units that I'm reviewing in this video. So if you look at the different units, they don't have the heating elements in them. They are heat pump only. So you lose the redundancy of being able to have just the electric resistance heat if you need it. Both units are also less efficient than the unit that I'm reviewing. And I want to say the one in the middle actually comes with a warning that you can only install that in climate zones 1 and 2. And that is because further north, the groundwater actually gets cold enough in the wintertime that that unit cannot maintain heat. So just be very cautious about which one you are buying. You want, if possible, the 240 volt, 30 amp hybrid Proterra unit. So to their credit, they actually make this fairly clear on Home Depot's website as to which one you are buying. The 15 amp ones typically specifically say they are to replace gas units or units that you want to convert to a heat pump and you just don't have the ability to run a 30 amp circuit to those units. In my opinion, I would not personally want one of those, as I am in a climate zone 5. Next concern, recovery time. So yesterday is a really good example. I was home and the heat pump water heater kicked on at about 10:30 a.m. and didn't kick off until 11:30 p.m. But let's talk about what I did in that time. I started dishes from the dishwasher. I ran 3 loads of laundry. I gave my older son a bath first and then a shower. Then I gave my younger son a shower and then I showered. So essentially this was low-level water usage all day while we were home. The last shower and last bit of hot water that I used for the day essentially occurred at 7:30 p.m. and it ran until 11:30-ish p.m. So to go from almost empty to back to full took almost 4 hours. Now, having said that, never once did my main electrical elements kick on. This was 100% the heat pump portion doing its thing. And I will say that I used a significantly low amount of power for the amount of hot water that I used this day. So for me, if recovery time is your concern, your bigger concern probably needs to be, did I tank size correctly? So one thing about these are they go all the way up to an 80-gallon tank. That's a big deal because the 80 gallons are actually more efficient than the 50 gallons. And if you think about how these work, that makes a lot of sense. As you have usage of your hot water, your cold water is coming in from the bottom and it is filling from the bottom to the top. So if you have a larger amount of hot water, you get less mixing. So every time you add more water in the bottom, there's a larger amount of hot water to buffer that cold water as it's coming in. So you'll actually find that if you have anxiety about running out of hot water, you're better off with these to actually buy the biggest tank you can afford. I will, however, warn you that the 80-gallon heat pump version of this is about $2,400 to $2,600. So it has an even larger amount to overcome to get in. Other problems that I have actually seen online, sometimes people have trouble finding plumbers who will install these. They are still new enough that there's just some of the old school guys out there that don't want to adapt to the new changes. So they don't want to work on these. There were some unknowns about, well, how well are these things going to hold up over time? Another big concern that I did see online is if something does go wrong, who do I call to service these? So that's a valid concern because this is not only a plumbing, hot water fixture, this is also a heat pump. So you would potentially have to have someone who's knowledgeable in both of those areas. And it's not like necessarily refrigeration and plumbing cross over all the time. They do in the industrial setting more, but not typically in the residential. So the silver lining for if something actually does go wrong with your heat pump circuit is, again, you can actually just pull up the app or walk downstairs to the unit, put it on resistance elements only, and you still have hot water, just like a regular tank, until you can find someone to repair it or to come in and repair it. So warranties is another issue where obviously these are slightly more complex than your average just let it eat electricity water heater. Yes, I understand that. They truly are a little bit more. But we've been doing heat pumps, guys, for decades. And honestly, they have them to the point where they're pretty reliable most of the time. Now, are there potentially factory defects? Absolutely, and in everything. So it's not just this instance that you could have that. The whole reason I replaced my original hot water in this house was because the element had gone bad. And it was of an age where it needed to be replaced anyway. Unfortunately, 2 years later, I learned about heat pump water heaters and I just had to have one. So there are benefits to all of this. And I think now that we're mostly done with the drawbacks and you're completely against buying a heat pump water heater, let's flip over and I'll show you why you do want to buy a water heater that has a heat pump in it. So guys, before we start unpacking this data, let's talk about where this came from. So in August of 2022, my good friend Aaron and I both installed Emporia View 2 smart home energy monitors. If you guys are unfamiliar with what these are, they basically have a clamp that goes around the individual wires in your breaker box, and it monitors how much energy is being pulled through each branch of your box that you feel like monitoring, up to 16 per kit. So a little bit about his household. His household has 2 adults and 3 children. During this same time frame, my household had 3 adults and 2 children. So this is almost as apples to apples as I could get without having my strict before and after energy expenditures. So his is a snapshot 1 year average in both 23, 24, and then in 25. As you can see, we had some honestly incredible savings in terms of energy reductions between his house and mine. So if we look at the overall savings, I saved 10,753 kilowatt hours over what he used during this same time frame. If you want to plug in your electricity usage, feel free to use these numbers. Ours is generically 13.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So in those 3 years that I have monitored, I saved $1,452. And the average kilowatt hour savings per year was 3,584 kilowatt hours. So essentially, I saved $484 a year on average and had a return on investment of 3.7 years. So does this level of savings even make sense? Well, this is the actual Energy Star label that is on the side of my heat pump. And if you look at the very bottom in the fine print, the most bottom line, it actually says estimated annual kilowatt hour usage, 866 kilowatt hours. That's very nearly dead on for what I did during the average of these 3 years. In terms of estimated annual energy costs of $104, that was assuming that energy is 12 cents per kilowatt hour. I, however, pay 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour. So easily enough, you can just scale this to whatever your particular area charges for electricity costs, and you'll have a very good and probably a pretty accurate picture of what you'll actually spend versus what you may save. Okay, for those of you still not convinced, you will probably never be convinced. However, for the analytical mindset out there, you're asking the question, but Travis, what if Aaron's house just used that much more water than you? And that's a valid question. We have the same tank size, we have very similar family sizes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the same energy usage in terms of how much hot water we're using. So in these instances, the accrediting bodies have actually come up with what's called a uniform energy factor. So this is how you compare your efficiency between different types of hot water heaters. So unfortunately, Aaron's Energy Star label was lost to the ravages of time. So for the purposes of this sheet, we're going to just assume he has a very highly efficient electric resistance water heater. That carries a uniform energy factor of 0.95. The energy factor on my heat pump water heater is 3.88, but you have to do a two-step conversion for this to work. So what you first have to do is, if we look in the year 2023 in the regular kilowatt hour heat pump usage, you'll see that Aaron used 4,521 kilowatt hours of energy. So you take that number and you multiply it by 0.95, because you're only getting 0.95 watts worth of heating out of every electrical watt you put into the unit. You then take that number and divide by 3.88, which is the uniform energy factor for the heat pump water heater. That is what is in the UEF 3.88 regular column. So this is what Aaron, in theory, under perfect circumstances, would have paid in terms of kilowatt hour usage had he had the same unit that I have. So his 4,521 kilowatt hours worth of energy drops down to 1,107 watts worth of energy. So we can actually do the same thing and take mine and reverse engineer that. So I take my usage, which was 818 kilowatt hours, multiply that by 105%, and then multiply that by 3.88. So that takes me to 3,332 kilowatt hours. So essentially, I know this is a little math voodoo-y, but that changes the return on investment, and honestly, it makes it look like, as in a worst case scenario, I would have a return on investment in savings alone in 5 years. Aaron's, in theory, in this instance, looks like it would be 4 years. So all of this must be taken with a grain of salt, because we are operating under a set of guidelines that are established just to kind of bring things to an even playing field. So this is not perfect, but this is essentially as close as I could come. Other benefits for this unit, I've mentioned some of these before, but just to kind of throw most of the cons together in one place, it does provide some additional cooling capability in the room that it's installed. It does have some dehumidification potential. It does add redundancy. So if the heat pump cycles down, you can run on electric resistance. If the electric resistance element goes bad, you still have the heat pump. I'm a big fan of redundancy because everything breaks at some point in time. This unit also provides a slightly higher first hour hot water output in gallons. So this one is actually rated at 67 gallons of hot water in the first hour. The exact same non-heat pump unit from Rheem has a 63 hours, so nothing spectacular. Another 4 hours of potential hot, another 4 hours, another 4 gallons of hot water in that first hour, which could potentially be another 2 minutes if you had a 2 gallon per minute head installed. Nothing earth-shattering, but it is still more, and that actually comes because you can run both the heat pump portion and the resistance elements at the same time. Great unit, guys, honestly. Another thing about it is it has app integration. So for those of you who are really big into home integration, my friend Aaron, who eventually will have one of these, I'm sure will find some way to steal this data and bend the unit to his will, but I'm not that tech savvy, so I'm fine with it kind of doing its own thing. Let me show you what the app looks like, and we'll talk about it just a little bit more there. So this is what the face of the app looks like. You can actually see that you can go in here, you can change the set temperature. You can't see this portion, but you can actually change the mode that it's in. So you can tell it that you want it to be in heat pump only mode. You can tell it that you want it to be in hybrid mode, energy saver, electric elements only. You can also, from this screen, set it to home versus away versus vacation, and you can tell it what you want each of those individual set points to mean. So the more important thing on this app is probably that there is an option for time of use scheduling. So you could actually schedule this if you were in a state where you had different time of use charges. You could make it run during those time frames and potentially save additional money. Or if you had solar set up, you could have it set to only turn on the heat pump during the day to actually bring that up to temperature while you're making solar. So that's kind of nice. The next one down is its own method of tracking the energy expenditure. So I did have some issues with this. One, it seems that it always overestimated its own energy usage. And this actually made me concerned that maybe my Emporia view was inaccurate. But I did double check the readings that I was getting with my Klein clamp meter, and those two matched very nearly identical. So I really just think that it's the software not correctly reading something that's going in there. Also on that, the bar graph didn't actually line up with the months. So I think that the energy tracking is a little bit of a hot mess. I don't trust it necessarily. The next option down is the heart, and that is actually the health check. So this will tell you if there is a problem with either the heat pump or the electric resistance elements. So that's honestly kind of nice, and that'll actually throw up a warning if it has an issue. In theory, I haven't had one, so fingers crossed. Luckily, hopefully I won't. The last option down in the bottom is just your Wi-Fi connection. The other thing that's kind of nice is that it will show you how full your tank is from a hot water standpoint at any time. And I've actually found this useful for going in and seeing, if I take a shower first thing in the morning just before it would have cut on. I do occasionally get some tepid water. It is not a frequent occurrence, and it's always just the fact that the unit was set to where it almost would have ran right before I started taking the shower. So to me, this wasn't a problem, and I don't really think it would be for most people. If you've stayed this long, guys, really, thank you for your time. I don't know how much more I would really have to say about this. If there's any individual area or topic that I didn't do a very good job of covering, or you wanted more information, feel free to leave a comment down there and I'll check it and see if I can find an answer to it. I've been honestly pretty thrilled with the amount of savings that I've had with this thing. I don't notice any difference in my hot water quantity or quality, to be honest. It's been silently saving me money the whole time I've had it down there. I would certainly buy it again. Guys, I think that's probably it for this one. So if this was helpful, useful, I really just kind of want this hard dollars and cents information out there. So if you would like and subscribe so that the algorithm will kind of throw this to the top so that hopefully more people will see this and could potentially make a more informed decision. So until the next time, thanks guys.